Hey, this is Brian Yellow. Let's see, this is Origin Stories on Creativity number 13, and I got the opportunity to speak with Kevyn Winkless. Kevyn is a Canadian. He is living in Japan. That is incredibly interesting, and I did not talk to him 1 second about anything involving being Canadian living in Japan except for the last little tiny bit of the podcast. In fact, we spent the entire hour discussing some really interesting topics involving the future of project development. He had some really good ideas. Really blew me away. Gave me shivers how good they were. Kevyn Winkless has contact information obviously in the show notes. Check him out. Check out his stuff. He's a really interesting guy. You can check out my stuff at brianayellow.com as usual. Brianayellow is my handle on Twitter. And with no further ado, Kevyn Winkless. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's really cool. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Brian. It's of course it's 2 o'clock in the morning here in Japan right now, but always glad to get up to join in with another fan of science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah, that's so cool of you. I'm so happy that you were willing to sacrifice your sleep to hang out and do a little talking. So I discovered you on Twitter. You're one of the first people that I saw writing Twitterlature. I can't even actually say it out loud. What prompted you to actually use that as a medium to write some literature?
Well, there were a couple of things, Brian. Actually, the first one was that I really wanted to get back into writing. I
Uh-huh.
had been writing actually for a long time, but as everybody knows who tries to write, the big challenge is time. Finding the
Yeah.
time to sit down and put pen to paper, as it were. And so I started using the time that I had on the train, commuting back and forth to work, to do some writing. But sometimes you just can't sit down and pull out your laptop and get going.
Oh,
So I was
especially in
starting.
Japan, right? I mean, they pack you guys in there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they really do pack them in. So I started writing on my phone because I could just pull out my phone and I could basically write with my thumb as I was going along. And the other thing that I really am interested in new media, and I was thinking of different ways that you could write a story. And I started trying to experiment with ways that you could use Twitter to build a story in different ways. I've kind of moved away from that now because really Twitter doesn't technologically support the sorts of things that I had in mind, the kinds of.
Well, before we move on, let's unpack two of those things. New
Sure.
media, which is fantastic, and then how you build a story with Twitter. I know you've moved away from that, but I want to kind of explore how you built a story on Twitter because I'm kind of exploring that myself now because I guess I'm behind the times. Can you maybe build that up a little bit? Explain to us how you built a story on Twitter.
Well, I don't know if you're behind the times, Brian. There's surely hundreds of different ways we can use the medium to build a story in a different way, and I'm sure you're doing something different from what I was doing.
Well, you're actually you're the reason that I'm doing it. I'm doing it slightly. You're the only reason that I'm the only person I've actually seen do it, honestly. And
Oh, really?
yeah, you're my mentor. You're my Twitterliterature mentor.
Oh,
So how do you build a story on Twitter?
well, I'll take that weighty responsibility and go from there, I guess. Um, Really, the key is, and I imagine most people listening to this are probably familiar with Ernest Hemingway
Hmm.
and the revolution that he created in short story writing. And short stories, actually, that's the other thing is that I'm very, very interested in short story as a medium for especially for genre writing, simply because it is such a great medium for experimentation. Unlike a novel where you have to commit for a long time,
Hmm.
not just in terms of actually creating the novel itself, but in terms of the reader's time to actually complete the story. A short story you can do in a very short time, so you can do some very interesting things with it. And Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but you haven't lost very much if it doesn't work. So going back to what I was doing on Twitter and what I am still doing on Twitter every once in a while now, is that I was trying to build a story that was constructed out of a series of coherent 140 character bytes.
Mm-hmm.
As far as possible, I was writing each tweet so that it could be read by itself. It wouldn't necessarily be meaningful as a story by itself, but I wasn't, writing long sentences that spanned over several tweets in most cases. And then the other thing that I was doing, of course, was trying to build up stories that were essentially serialized into a piece that I wrote today and then another piece that I wrote tomorrow, and they would link together over a longer period of time. So most people reading Twitter, of course, you follow a number of people, and so I'll throw one line of a tweet, one line of a story, and then you're going to have several other tweets in between before you get the next line. So everything needs to sort of fit together in a way that you can sort of read it piece by piece by piece and build up a fairly vivid image of what's going on in the course of the story. So as a result, most of the things that I've done on Twitter have tended to lean more towards atmospheric or sort of a prose poem sort of arrangement with a bit more plot to them than you normally see. Things that are, but they tend to be very vivid. I've tried to pack as much meaning as possible into such a small space. And that doesn't necessarily mean a lot of adjectives and adverbs necessarily, but that I have to be very careful about how each sentence is constructed
Yeah.
in order to evoke the feeling that I want.
Did you notice? Ooh, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Do you have me on speaker by chance?
I do.
Uh-oh. Is there a way you could put me on earbuds?
Possibly not, but what I will do is I will turn the speaker down a little bit for
you. Okay. Excuse me.
How's that?
Let's see. Oh, much better. Well, Twitter is definitely very brevity intensive. That's what I enjoy the most about it, is building those sentences with as few words as possible and still trying to get your meaning across. And building fiction in that way, it's definitely enhanced the way I write.
Actually,
go ahead.
Actually, it's true. Once I started playing with Twitter, my style of writing changed quite dramatically. And I found that even when I sat down for a more standard writing session, what I was writing changed. So by forcing myself into a very constricted medium, it really did teach me a lot of things about how to put a sentence together.
It's fascinating. And when you were writing your Twitterliture, did you notice that you were getting a following? Because I mean, you definitely had my attention. When you were doing it, I was like, oh, what's this guy doing? It's fascinating. Did you get people that were paying attention to the serials?
Well, I did actually, and in fact, even now, there are a couple of not quite finished stories which are sort of hanging out there that I got distracted from and need to get back to.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while, I have a few followers who will they'll retweet the last episode, or they'll like something. In that chain of tweets that I haven't touched in months in some cases. So yes, I definitely did get a few people following me who thought that what I was doing was of interest to them. Of course, most of the time I just assumed that I was howling into the void, as it were. It wasn't really I wasn't really writing it with the expectation of generating an audience, but I figured if I was writing it, it may as well be out there in public so that people could see it.
That's interesting. So let's get into new media. So you've explored Twitter and you've moved on, because I haven't seen you doing it that much anymore. What are you moving on to?
Well, actually, it's funny because I've really started to move a little bit more towards a more traditional writing now, taking what I've learned from Twitter and putting it back into the box, as it were. But what I was exploring really in the main part of the period where I was most active on Twitter with that experiment that I was doing was trying to figure out ways to write stories which were not linear.
Hmm.
So,
And not
um,
linear in what way?
well, I mean, as everybody knows, when you're online having a conversation in most media, the conversation will get threaded.
Hmm.
So you'll have a comment, and then two people will comment underneath that one. You can comment on person A's comment, or you can comment on person B's comment, right? And so the conversation starts to split up. Now, if you can imagine a story where you start with a situation that has two characters in it, and the characters are interacting, of course. But after a while, the scene ends, and those two characters move on. Well, character A is going to go in one direction, and character B is going to go in the other direction. And I was trying to figure out ways that using Twitter or other media, you could write a story because you're writing it in pieces. You can write it in such a way that the reader can follow a chain through a story space as opposed to following a line.
That's
So
really interesting because
you might
if you're on
end up
like a Reddit, like a forum type situation,
yeah,
you could
yeah,
actually follow one thread down through a conversation that goes completely, one direction and then there's another direction and then another direction. There's like five different threads that don't ever touch each other.
that's right. I mean, it. I suppose it's a little bit like a choose your own adventure book, right?
Yeah,
And actually, that's
that's
almost
exactly what it's like. That's so fascinating.
and that's actually the model that I was thinking of when I started to think about it. And well, this is an electronic medium. It's ideal really because it takes over job that the choose your own adventure reader has of trying to find the entry in the book that you're supposed to be reading next, right?
Hmm.
Um, so it allows you to craft plots in slightly different ways, to imagine a story space and allow the reader to move through that space in multiple different ways to get a sense of the world in which events are taking place.
Wow, that's a neat idea. Um, I am very sorry. This has happened once before where there's a tremendous echo when I try to engage. Unfortunately, it's happening again.
This might actually, I'm afraid it might be the space that I'm in. As it is 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying not to wake up my family, and
Oh,
the room that I'm in has quite a bit of it's quite large and
oh.
empty, so that might be part of it.
Maybe can you hear me if I lower my voice a little bit? I tend to have a lot of verbosity.
I can hear you quite well. Yes.
Okay, I will try not to be so excitable. Uh, New media, and when are you still writing in fantasy and science fiction, or are you writing in a more modern world?
I write. Well, that's an interesting way you put that, actually, because I don't think necessarily that there's a difference between fantasy and science fiction and modern world. But um, I would say that I principally write what you might call weird tales.
Weird tales. Okay,
Yeah, so
unbox
so
that for me.
I am quite a big fan of the pulp era of
Oh,
fantasy and science fiction. So going back to
Lovecraft.
the 1920s and the 1930s. Not well, Lovecraft's one, but there are a lot of big names from that period. Many of whom have been largely shoved aside and forgotten. I'm thinking of Merritt, for example, um, and who wrote such stories as The Moon Pool, and I'm thinking of even later names like Lee Brackett and C.L. Moore, and the other names from that period, many of whom were inspired by Lovecraft, or who were part of Lovecraft's writing circles, for example. But
That stuff has got a resurgence right now too. It's a
yeah,
really
that's true. There's a lot of interest, and I think one of the reasons is because again, it goes back to the short stories,
mhm.
and short stories do permit a great amount of experimentation. to be possible, so you can play with things. And the other thing is that there are a few. One of the things that I've been doing recently, I've been going back to those old stories and trying to unpack why the best of them have endured for so long. Now, obviously, as in any era, especially in any area where there's a large amount of publishing going on at any one time, there's a raft of mediocre and sometimes even worse work being published. But always gems, right?
Yeah.
And those gems are the ones that last, for I guess, we're in 2017 now, so we're talking about stories which have lasted 100 years.
Hmm.
And
So you can't have the best without having the worst, though, too. So even some of the worst ones have held up the better ones. What have you found out?
well, it's not really a matter of finding something out. In this case, it's sort of a matter of remembering
Uh-huh.
and discovering the formulas that the writers in that era were using to build stories that really compel.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I really have learned from many of the stories is that, especially in the fantasy and science fiction area, that a lot of it was about exploration. This sense of not knowing what's going to be around the next corner, and you can really get stories which are essentially very gonzo, as it were, where
Hmm.
it's what happens next is completely random and there's no connection, and those are the ones that don't really work anymore. But the ones that are working, even now, 100 years later, and they're still very good stories. What's happened is I find that the author has created this space. Again, let's talk about this story space idea again that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about new media. They've created this space, and as you move through the story, the author is continually peeling away layers which are hiding pieces of the story space in one way or another. So when I say exploration, I mean it could be something like the heroes are actually going to a new place and discovering that new place as they move through it. But the same concept applies to things like the detective stories of the era, because the detective protagonist is starting from a fairly ordinary modern day, for them anyway, scenario, and then as they make each step through the plot, something new arises. Something is pulled away. The curtain is pulled away, and we learn something new that takes us a step away from the ordinary, mundane world. And the rule basically is to every step as you move forward to create something new, which is going to surprise the reader and make them wonder what's going to happen after that. And that pulls you through the story. It's the same technique that you use when you're writing any kind of text, where the idea that the end of one paragraph should be a hook that pulls you into the next paragraph.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's conceptual.
That's interesting. Can you give me an example other than, your detective is moving from one scene to the next? What's going to hook? What kind of hook are you talking about?
Well, if you can imagine, for example, I'm trying to think of a concrete example that maybe listeners could go and look up, but I'm coming up blank since it is, after all, 2 o'clock in the morning.
It's like completely understandable. While you were
But
talking, though, I was thinking about the narrative device. It's called framing. Where a guy would get a letter from somebody, and in that letter they would be talking about a story, and in that story they would be telling about another guy who told them a story, so that you'd have like another device that's already starting where they had an excuse to tell the third story. So they've already like
sure.
removed themselves 3 times from the actual reason that you've sat down to read this ghost story.
That's
So
one example. Actually, while you were talking, I was just thinking
sure.
of the Mountains of Madness, going back to Lovecraft,
Hmm.
which starts sounding very much like a fairly ordinary, scientific autobiographical um, account of an expedition, and slowly goes from an ordinary scientific expedition of the sort that the readers at the time might have seen in the newspaper, written by some academic who'd gone off somewhere and was writing an editorial piece for the papers. And in the end, we by the time we're done, each step that we've taken along the way has eventually brought us to a space where there are these weird alien mummies under the mountains of Antarctica. So that's the kind of exploration I'm talking about. You know, taking one step away from mundane reality with each step. It's a bit like Zelazny's amber idea, where there are a multitude of realities, and people who have the power to do so can take one step from this reality to the parallel reality, which is all the same except that bluebirds are orange, for example, in one scene in the original novel.
So how would you create this narrative in new media?
Well, what we could do in new media, I think, is, for example, if you were to imagine a scene, and there are maybe a number of elements in the scene which could lead to something new. So your characters are in a room, and perhaps they could open a door and go outside, or perhaps they could answer the telephone, or perhaps they could take a book off the library shelf and open it up to page 103. And those three things are all perfectly valid options for the actions of your protagonist.
Well, how do you present the options to the reader?
How would you present them to the reader? Well, what you would do is you would I think write the scene in an evocative way such that each three of those options appears to be the cusp of a crisis that needs to be resolved. And of course, I don't necessarily mean crisis in terms.
So the crisis is like your inciting incident. That's what starts up. That's the interesting part, right? So if I'm like looking at what keeps popping into my head, one of my favorite websites is Reddit. Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I'm familiar. I don't use it very often myself, but yeah, I know what you're talking about there.
So like you start out, you're scrolling through Reddit and something just pops out. And, oh, I have to read that. And you click on it. That's your inciting incident, right? That's the story that you want to read. So now you're on this thread, and the thread is your story.
That's right.
You started out on the title, so now you're in the thread.
Yeah, actually, the model I would go a bit further even than Reddit, and I would say that the type of model that I would think of for this sort of new media, multi-dimensional, non-linear sort of storytelling would be more like Wikipedia, because that's exactly the same situation, right? You
Absolutely.
Next thing you know, 3 hours have passed, and you're nowhere near the article you actually went looking for.
Oh, how did I end up here? Yeah, exactly. You're in totally different like world, basically. You're in space someplace. What a neat thing. And basically you've just followed a chain of links to find yourself in a totally different story, basically.
That's right. So going back to my example, if you
ahead.
can imagine the room, and if you were to describe those three options, the book, the window, the telephone call, and the door, and if you frame just a small scene in which all three of those seem really interesting, and so the reader might be drawn to any of those three options, but then they can follow one of those options, and that draws them into a different part of the story than they would have if they'd I don't know, clicked on the telephone call rather than opening the door.
Or they can finish reading what they're reading, which is what, they can finish reading that story, or they can go back up and say, oh, I want to know about this guy's life. And that guy's life is laid out. Oh, that's a really neat idea.
And if you can imagine writing such a story where maybe you're following different characters through the story space, those characters can re-intersect later on.
Well, Kevin, I got chills, because I mean, honestly, that could be, I don't think anybody's writing novels like that, and that could be a novel. Thousands of pages worth of prose, basically.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, literally nobody is writing that, as far as I know. Because
maybe I should stop this broadcast right now so we can keep between us. That's a really fantastic idea.
Well, it's very challenging.
Thank goodness you're in Japan and not like down the street, or you'd come and murder me. So you keep it for yourself. No, I'm like totally impressed. That's a really good idea.
Well, it certainly kept me interested for a long time, trying to figure out how to do that using Twitter. Very experimented with technology. number of different ways using hashtags and so forth as a way to allow readers to actually follow different parts of
Interesting.
the story.
I didn't even think about hashtags. That would be a good way to do it. I was thinking like a WordPress type website situation where you would start the page and then have the links to places in the WordPress article or the word page.
Yeah, I think that would probably work a lot better. That's one of the reasons why I'm not really. I started stepping away from Twitter a little bit because I found that there were technological limitations there, which were making it a bit difficult for me to do some of the things that I was imagining.
You could still kind of work it, but you'd have to have a lot of Twitter accounts to kind of make it happen.
Well, exactly. That's actually what I was looking at doing at one point was trying to figure out a way to generate bots, for example. So you could have a number of Twitter accounts, one for each character in the story, and they could interact with one another as well as you went along. The only problem is that it becomes difficult to show the reader where to start. Although I'm not sure if that's really
well, it's not really a problem if you think about the whole Wikipedia idea, because you jump into Wikipedia at any place and you end up all over the place. I mean, you can end up, there's no beginning, no middle, no end.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and that's the really fun thing about this idea that
it doesn't matter where you start because it doesn't. You're in a pool of fun, basically. I mean, the whole idea is entertainment.
Yeah, it's almost like building a Wikipedia
of story.
Well, it's like building a Wikipedia of a world that
world building. Absolutely. Right. God, I know some guys. If you've been listening to this podcast, I know some guys that would love that too, because they've been building worlds their entire lives.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about the new media, right? It's it really is amazing what we can do with the technology, and we can really do things that were unimaginable 20 years ago.
No, it's true. Let me ask you, Kevin, what do you do for? Well, I don't want to ask you. Would you like to volunteer what you do for a living? Are you a writer by trade, or?
I am not. I'm living and working in Tokyo, doing quite a lot of business consulting and that sort of thing.
So you're not in IT or CS or anything like that?
No.
You just have a great imagination.
No, really, writing is a completely different part of my life. It's not really related to my professional world at all. And writing is how I get away from my everyday life. Really, it's my escape. So it's where other people might sit down in front of the TV and watch a football game, while I sit down in front of Twitter and try to figure out ways to blow people's minds with new ways of making stories.
Wow, you blew my mind. That is an amazing way to generate content. That's really cool. Do you think that might be the way of the future, or how do you think? What are some of the other ideas that you've thought of for new media?
Well,
or take that in a different direction. I mean, that's obviously mind blowing.
It's really, I mean, the possibilities are really endless. I mean, as I said, you can write a story as sort of a Wikipedia of a world. So you follow things through that world. Other ideas that I've had have been to make the characters of your story, for example, as I commented before, into Twitter characters who actually interact with one another
on Twitter,
create dramas on Twitter, for example, right? There's all these interactive Twitter bots which have been created. They're kind of like Eliza programs where you can talk to them and they'll respond to you from a database. So that, for example, you might have a database and I won't say an AI because it wouldn't be anything nearly that.
Isn't Eliza the one they actually ended up saying they got to say like complimentary things about Hitler eventually, or something along those lines?
Well, exactly. But now, if you can imagine, if you could interrogate a Twitter bot and ask them questions. And so instead of reading a story, you have to pull the pieces of the story out of the Twitter bot's mind. So you're asking questions, and of course, it looks at its database and it gives you the answer from the database, right? But you can ask them. So where were you on Monday first, right? And the Twitter bot says, oh, I was on the train when suddenly a man got on. And so instead of telling the story in a normal way, the reader has to engage and ask questions. And because of the new technology, we can do that. The story can actually interact with the reader.
I would say use George Lucas as an example and keep your audience away from your invention as far as possible. If you let the audience too near it, they will destroy it.
That's certainly true. It's so easy to be to get your story destroyed,
I think I thought the idea of letting your characters interact with each other was fascinating. I thought that'd been really cool. If you click on a link of this person, it shows an @ symbol, their character name. You click on it, you can go to their Twitter page. Maybe it actually you could see 4 or 5 new tweets. You can click on that and see a conversation developing or something along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly what happens. It's the reason why people get obsessed with soap operas, for example, right?
Yeah.
You see the characters interacting, and you can watch them. So, for example, you might get interested on Twitter by some things that one of the characters is saying without really knowing that there's a story going on. And you click on them, you notice, oh, they're talking to this guy over here, and you start following that, and next thing you know, you've learned the names of the 6 characters in your story, and you can see how they're interacting with each other over time.
No, this is a really fascinating idea. I mean, my imagination is going crazy on how you can actually work this out. There's a lot of logic problems, though, that I don't think my brain can actually so I
ran into the same wall. So
yeah. I think this is more than just one person could work, though. I would love to be on a team of writers doing this.
Yeah,
I would love. I'm actually picturing like 4 or 5 different artists building this together.
Well, do you know what? I agree completely, because one of the things that I was thinking of about this time last year, actually, in terms of what we could do on Twitter with things like that. I was thinking at the time, I was reading a lot about how the writing industry was working back in the 1940s and the 1950s with the explosion of pocketbooks and these huge franchises of stories like Doc Savage and so forth, where Doc Savage is a slightly separate case, but with many of these, like things like the Hardy Boys and other series of novels like that, they may have all had the same author name on the book, but in reality, that was a house byline. In fact, there were maybe a dozen different writers all working on the stories. And as a result, they were working together to create this world and to create the characters and build them up and give them meat over the course of a dozen or 2 dozen books. So it would make sense, really, for a story like this, because it's such a fine-grained way of building a world, to do it the way that we've been discussing. That I think you're right. One person probably wouldn't be able to do it, wouldn't be able to keep it up.
And there are people out there, like I said, I've spoken with a few writers right now who've spent a good portion of their lifetimes developing worlds filled with ideas that they have no place to place. I mean, that this would be perfect for, is the direction I wanted to take that statement. That this type of idea would be like they've got stuff already built for it.
Yeah, so I mean,
hyperlinks just made for it.
Sure. I mean, it creates a possibility where you can have a piece of fiction which is compelling in a way that an ordinary linear story isn't necessarily. Because an ordinary linear story, and I see this a lot in a lot of modern science fiction and fantasy short stories. A lot of them are, there's I won't go so far as to say there's no plot, but they tend to be very atmospheric. They tend to be very focused on the scene and the characters themselves, and less on what's actually happening. In a linear story, that I personally I think that can be a bit of a failure. But if you frame it in the context of the reader exploring a world of their own volition, by following the hyperlinks and so forth
Mhm.
through the world, like a Wikipedia, it becomes a lot more compelling, I think,
It's
because
your story. I mean, you could, like I said, looking at the Reddit example that I mentioned, you could click on the story that interests you and go off on your own breadcrumb trail. And when you and your friends get together later on, you could say, "Did you blah blah blah?" And they'll say, "No, but I blah blah blah." And you're totally talking about the same story, but you had different experiences.
that's right.
It's
That's right.
really
And
fascinating. And
that's
they're
the
like,
great.
"Oh, well, I got to check that link out," and they still didn't find the same place. I mean, that's just not as one writer that dies after 80 years and probably can't write that much, but still, I mean, the possibilities are endless. They
Oh,
really are.
absolutely. It is a huge world out there because these are things that we wouldn't have been able to do in a strictly paper format, right? And with the new media which are available to us, I really do think that they're not being leveraged in ways that are possible, and it would
So
be really
interesting.
interesting. It
Do
would be
you
really
um
interesting.
do you ever play like those online role playing games like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or anything like that?
No, no, but in fact, actually, one of the reasons why this sort of idea I was of interest to me is because I used to be quite a big gamer as well, more tabletop than electronic though.
Okay. But this has like a similar type of atmospheric component to that. But instead
Yeah,
of having to get around the table, all you have to do is click on a link and you could find yourself someplace else.
that's right. That's right. It's exactly the same sort of an idea, but it's put together in a slightly more tightly framed uh, uh, format so that the author has a bit more control over what's going to happen as the reader moves through the story in different ways. But I'm sure that as these sorts of things become a bit more common, so for example, as VR technology takes off, I'm sure the similar sort of storytelling will take place there. In fact, it probably will come to fruit in the VR space long before
I
it
don't know. I got
hits
disappointed when you said VR, honestly. I feel like we want VR so badly, but every time VR comes out, the market says, this isn't really what I want a VR to be. Because unfortunately, it doesn't really match up with what our imaginations want it to actually accomplish.
Yeah.
Our
Well,
imaginations are powerful. Um, I
yeah.
think our imaginations will never, VR will never compare with our imaginations, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, no, it will be difficult, I think, for VR to really hold up to what we can do inside our own minds, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it will be interesting to see because I really think that VR is the place where nonlinear storytelling will make sense sooner.
I believe the
That,
internet's definitely the place where non-linear storytelling will take place.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I definitely agree there. I don't know about virtual reality. That term itself, what is it? I mean, we can
Well,
explore that for a minute because that's new
I
age technology too, isn't it?
I think it depends on what you mean by virtual reality
That's
too.
exactly my question. What
I,
exactly is
I'm
virtual
not
reality?
thinking. Yeah, I'm not thinking strictly in terms of you put on the goggles and you feel like you're there.
I think that's the limitation of my imagination is I'm like, oh, let's put the goggles on and define virtual reality that way. How do you define virtual reality?
Okay, let me put another spin on it for you.
Sure.
I can't remember the term for it off the top of my head, but there have been
Augmented reality is that what you're thinking of?
no, no, no.
Oh. How about I
What
let
I've
you
been
talk, Kevin? I'll just let you
okay,
I'll let you answer the question that I posed to you instead of being rude.
I'm actually thinking of there have been a number of marketing campaigns over the years which are really quite interesting. And what they've done is they've created characters on the internet. They've given them blogs. They've fabricated photographs and so forth, and left sort of breadcrumb trails across the internet that are hints towards fictional events, but they're framed in a way that sort of looks real. It's a kind of viral marketing technique which has been used by a number of different companies. And the idea is that there's a story. There's a story about fictional characters, but it's not all in one place. It's in bits and pieces here and there. And you actually have to go searching through the internet to find the pieces. And they're built in such a way that some people are actually compelled to go searching the internet to find, that comment on Reddit that was actually written by the PR team, not by anybody else, which then leads them on to the YouTube video, which then leads on to photographs of some graffiti on a wall on a particular street in Los Angeles, right? And then people actually have been known in following these viral marketing campaigns to actually go to that street corner in LA to see that piece of graffiti. And if the piece of graffiti is actually there, and it is sort of like an alternate reality that's being fictional.
What is that called though? I know exactly what you're talking about. I've heard this term before, and I can't even come up with the marketing campaigns that I've seen this for.
No, I know it. And when these things happen, it always makes me wonder if this is just another fabrication that my mind has created.
I don't know that I've concocted it too. I know I've heard of this recently too. Well, then again, maybe we're making up the same reality. Maybe we exist in the same concocted dream of a giant tortoise floating in space.
Instead of using it for marketing, using that sort of an approach to write a story as well. And again, you get the exploration dimension comes in because the readers are actively seeking out the bits and pieces of the story.
Yeah, but the problem is people want to read on the train. You know what I mean? On the toilet, in bed at night, on the couch. Reading, what we try to do is give them an excuse not to move. And the same thing with, they want it to be a passive activity. Normally.
Yes.
No, they don't want to leave. They don't want to go out and explore the world. That's my opinion.
Well, that's certainly true, but the fact of the matter is that they're reading these stories because, as human beings, we're compelled to explore, and maybe they don't want to get up off the sofa, but they still want to explore because human beings love exploring. We love finding new things. So instead of getting up off the sofa, we open up the book and we go and explore in that story instead.
Exactly. Wow, this is a really great. I just really, my mind is blown. It just gives me something to play with in terms of what to do with my fiction going forward. Something I really want to do. Create this whole world that kind of links together in a way. That's really interesting. Have you done anything with it yet? Have you developed anything that's clickable in such a way?
I have a few fragmentary things which I haven't actually stuck online because I started experimenting with them and trying to just on my own computer trying to make them work. And it really is challenging. The technical challenges are quite significant. Trying to figure out the best ways to link things together.
Well, you would need tens of thousands of words to make it compelling, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And that's the challenge, right? Because you feel compelled to put a complete thing in.
And you would have to find, you can't just click on the random things. You would have to find the nuggets, the gold.
I think it's a different kind of barrier. I mean, everyone has this, right? When they're writing fiction, you'll write a story and you'll think, it's not good enough yet for other people to read. So you go back and you edit it some more and think, it's still not quite good enough. And I think it's a similar sort of problem that I have with this type of writing. I think it's obvious when you're writing something nonlinear like that, something like a Wikipedia story, as it were, that there are going to be links which don't go anywhere yet, right? Just like in Wikipedia, you get to these, you read an article and some of the links will take you on to another article, but other links will take you to a page where it tells you there should be an article here, and if you know anything, please write one. So, I think I have to overcome this compulsion to put a complete product into the public eye, so that other people can see what I'm thinking about, and in terms of story writing in this way, and experiment with it a little bit.
Hmm.
Um,
I totally agree. So you're in sales, you said, right?
no, I'm not in sales.
Oh, you're not in sales.
I'm a consultant. I'm a business
You're a
consultant.
consultant. Well, my thought just now, and you're going to love this because I love it when my mom would do this to me, the big suggestion, you should go to Neil Gaiman and say, let me take American Gods and give it the Wikipedia treatment. And all his characters just have his American Gods. That novel is right
Yeah.
for this. Just give all of his characters the treatment. Click it. Oh my God.
Yeah.
His novel, I mean, I could just, while you're talking, I just imagine that novel being done like this, and you're off to the races,
Oh, sure, sure.
right?
That's exactly the sort of thing that I'm thinking. I mean, it'd be kind of like adapting a story to the screen, right? If you imagine
Exactly.
adapting a
Exactly.
story to Wikipedia, which is kind of a weird concept, but
I mean, I know you're a writer. Instead of being the writer, though, maybe this is the next thing because film is struggling, isn't it? Film isn't really doing as well as film wants to do. The
no,
internet is God. Television is dying too. The internet is God. The internet is the next new thing. Maybe this is the next new thing on the internet. Maybe I shouldn't upload this. We'll make it private. I'll be in on it too.
go for it. I'll see what you do with the idea. Run with it.
Run with it. I'll be actually, I'll tell you, man, this is a really good idea. I think you have something here.
Well, I'm still playing around with it, and I certainly hope that once I start getting things out there, it'll interest people. I'm sure people with a bit more talent than me will run with it and make something even better. But I really do think it's a compelling idea, and I think that there's some interesting potentials
Yeah.
to different ways to structure a story. And one of the things that actually inspired me was this concept. It's not Japanese; it's Chinese. There's a Chinese traditional essay writing style called the eight-legged essay,
Huh.
and the idea is that rather than writing a kind of linear argument from A to Z to argue your point,
Hmm.
you actually write several um, related essays. I can't remember who it was. There was actually a science fiction writer back, I think it was in the 1980s, who wrote an eight-legged story, and essentially it's the same event, but it's written over again 8 times from the perspective of different characters.
Huh. That's interesting.
So, so each section of the story is actually the same events from the same starting point to the same ending point, but the perspective, of course, is completely different because it's different people.
They do that in sitcoms occasionally where they write the same arc 3 times or so.
Right, right. So the timeline's roughly the same, and they intersect with each other during the course of the timeline. Well, that's one way of doing it, but the great thing about the internet is that we can now take those 8 stories, right, and intertwine them in new ways, and that was another one of the inspirations for this idea that I've been playing with for a little while now.
And are you? I'm guessing you're. Do you speak Japanese?
I do, I do. I've
Do you
actually
speak Chinese as well?
no, I don't speak Chinese. I don't speak
No.
Chinese at all.
uh, I could see this working for the. I don't read any of the mangas or whatnot, but I can imagine the Japanese would jump. They would jump all over this type of storytelling.
Well, it's funny you say that because actually, there has been over the last few years. Japan was from looking from the West. People say that Japan was kind of later than people expected, adopting the ebook campaign, and partly, of course, that was resistance from the publishers, and so it was difficult to get the rights to convert things to ebooks. The other reason was that there was actually an entire dimension of the publishing industry that that was invisible to the West because people were writing stories on their feature phones and just passing them around by email to one another. And if you can imagine, you know, probably everybody has heard of fanfic, right? And if you can imagine in the high school students and college students who were fans of a particular manga or anime, writing stories about their favorite characters and then sharing them with each other through the phone medium, right? And sort of building on each other's stories and intertwining those stories and building up an entire reality around a particular comic that they're all reading. Right. So the publishers are publishing the comic and they're buying them in the stores, but then they're creating an entire reality on top of that in their phones.
That's wonderful. Well, what are we going to do, Kevin? Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. I thought I lost you for a second.
Okay.
We're closing in at 3 a.m. in the morning for you. I know you wanted to get off here in an hour. We
Yeah.
never even touched on your life in Japan at all, and I was thinking that we'd have like this whole conversation on food because I love ramen, but we never even got there.
I don't know if we're gonna have time for that this time, Brian.
What we have 10 minutes. What do we want to talk about?
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's see what we can pack in there in terms of life in Japan. Um, Throw a question at me. Let's see what we can get.
How bad is the commute?
Commuting. Well, I think everyone's seen those pictures of the little men on the train station with their white gloves pushing people into trains. And I'm sure everyone wonders if that's real. And I will assure you that it is real. And commuting can be a bit of a bear here, but it's not as bad as you might think because the trains are really very efficient here. The trains are always on time. They're clean. People are very orderly. And yeah, you're squished into somebody's armpit on your way to work, but the commuting's not so bad. It can get a little hairy in the summer when it gets really hot, but that's
Oh, the trains don't have air conditioning.
well, they do, but in the Tokyo area, which is where I live, the trains are during rush hour pretty much routinely over 200% capacity.
Wow. And I complain. I'm in New York City. I complain when I have to even touch another person. Like touch as in their shadow even drapes my shoes. That's touching for me.
Yeah, come to Japan.
Like,
I think you have to throw away your concepts of personal space if you're going to
yeah,
go
I
there.
man spread here, and it's like, oh man, I have to close my legs a little bit. That's
Yeah, that's not
horrible.
happening here, Brian. That's just not happening.
And plus, being the fact that you get some dirty looks, I imagine too, being Caucasian.
Well, no, not really. To be honest, you know, Japan is a very welcoming place. The Japanese are very friendly and very kind. Um, there is a tendency in Tokyo, of course, as in any big city, to try to just not engage with people you don't know, and especially for people who maybe don't speak English. They might, when they see a foreigner, try to avoid interacting with them, not because they're afraid of foreigners, but because they're embarrassed that they won't be able to talk to you. And if you ask for
Hmm.
directions, they won't be able to help you, and so they try to avoid sometimes interacting. But otherwise, no. You can walk down the street here and maybe turn down an alley and go into a tiny little mom and pop ramen shop. Let's go back to your ramen,
Oh
and
man.
there might only be 5 or 6 seats there, and you can walk in and sit down, and you might not be able to speak Japanese. They can't speak English, but ramen and beer is the universal language.
I want ramen so bad right now. Just talking to somebody in Japan makes me want ramen. Um, in terms of travel, there is no better way to explore who you are and just, I don't know, get some new ideas pushed out into your writing. How long have you been over there?
I've actually been living in Japan on and off for about 20 years.
So, when was the last time you were living in the States? Like full on, not States, I'm sorry, living in Canada.
I was back in Canada pretty full on between 2002 and 2007.
Wow. So 7 years. Do you miss anything about being full on Canadian?
I do. In fact, one of the things that I miss, as you might have noticed from some of the stories that I've put up on Twitter, I'm from the north, so I actually do miss the cold.
So I don't know
Um,
why I thought you were from Nova Scotia.
I,
I was all excited to talk to you about being from Nova Scotia.
I can't I can't think of anything I might have said that might have given you that impression. But no, I'm actually from the north of Canada, northern Manitoba, and
That's what it is, the frozen north, I think you mentioned, and my mind just went Nova Scotia because I'm from New York and have no clue about Canada at all.
well, if you go straight north from New York, I guess you do eventually
Yeah.
Nova Scotia. So it does, but for me, that the summers here do get very hot. Um, uh, for a lot of people, it's pretty normal, but for me, it's can get a little bit unbearable because you have months of temperatures over 30. But
What's 30 in terms of people who don't do metric?
oh, sorry, uh, I guess you're looking in the 90s.
90s. Oh, that's
So
cold. It was like 96 degrees today in New York. 94 right now for us. It's horrible. What's next for you?
uh, you mean writing wise?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, right now I'm really pushing hard to get a lot of short stories done so that I can get them out there.
Are you publishing on the internet or are you just writing and keeping them to
Uh,
yourself and then publishing them for
I write
magazines?
I write a lot for myself.
You write
I
for
do
yourself.
magazines every once in a while, but to be honest, a lot of the stuff that I'm writing is so different from the core magazines in the science fiction and fantasy industries that I wonder if it really matches what their markets. Because I really am right at the moment. I'm experimenting with the old pulp formulas, and there's not really very many markets for that
Can
at
I
the moment.
ask you, do you read any of the actual short fiction magazines that are being published right now?
I do.
Do you?
I quite often check out, for example, Clark's World or Lightspeed, and of course, there's the big three: fantasy and science fiction, and Asimov's and Analog. I do look at them. I read them.
Do you write geared towards them at all? Or, I mean, you said you're pretty specific towards your
Well,
tastes.
well, no, it's not that because I like what I read in them quite often.
Hmm.
But it just happens that right at the moment, what I'm writing is more, as I said earlier, more like the Weird Tales style of writing. It's a more pulp-oriented style of writing, and there aren't very many outlets for that sort of thing right at the
Hmm.
moment.
Well, I gotta offer you a suggestion because I would love to read your stuff. I want you to use your blog, publish your fiction on it, let the world read your fiction, your prose.
Yeah, I could certainly do that. And in
That's how I
fact,
use my website anyway. I just publish my stuff.
yeah, that's true. That's true, and I've seen some of your stuff, and it's pretty good. So,
Oh, thank
so
you.
perhaps I should take a page out of your book and start doing that myself. I actually, as it happens, there are a number of, going back to new media, the publishing industry is changing, and there are a number of new magazines coming out as well, and it will be interesting to see how the marketplace diversifies as more writers have more access to the short fiction markets, with new markets emerging to see whether some of the old styles or even new styles start to emerge again. Um,
That's been my main problem is I don't know what's out there. I don't read any of the stuff. I don't buy magazines anymore. It's not on, I don't see it on Twitter. I don't see it on Reddit. I just don't see it where I'm looking. So it's like I don't want to send stuff out blindly because I don't get any results back from it. Like,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you really do need to know what the market is looking
yeah.
for, because the editor has a certain idea of what they want the magazine to do, and if you're not matching that, they're not
And
going
I
to buy
don't
it.
seem to be in their market. That seems to be the biggest problem. Is I'm not being marketed by them. So it's like, well, I'm not their demographic. It doesn't seem like I'm
Well,
not
there you
on their
go.
radar.
So you just have to create your own market, then, don't you?
Exactly what I'm trying to do.
You have to create your own market. So I guess
Yeah.
that's where to go.
What else we got? You have anything else you want to add? Anything I should point our listeners to if we ever get any?
No, I think we've covered the whole gamut of things today. It's unfortunate we didn't get to talk about Japan a little bit more, because I know you were looking forward to that.
Oh
But
man, you are a fantastic guest. Everything that you said was really, really cool. I'm so happy I got to talk to you, and that's been like my greatest takeaway from the 14 people that I have talked to for this podcast is that I never know where the conversations are going to go, and you all surprise me. I mean, your Wikipedia book idea, my mind is 100% blown. That's brilliant,
all right,
brilliant. And
now you've got something to do for the afternoon, I guess, and you're going to go off on Wikipedia.
I'm going to try and find my brain, man. It's all over the place. It's blown away. All right, Kevin. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending the last hour with me. If you do want to come back on, you have an open invitation.
Absolutely, I had a great time.
Thank you, sir.
All right,
Have a good morning.
you too.
Bye bye.
Good afternoon.
And that was Kevyn Winkless. Again, check out the show notes. Some cool stuff in there. BrianYellow.com is my website. Brian Yellow on Twitter if you want to follow developments. I put some art up there occasionally, some writing prompts, ridiculousness, all that fun stuff. I do have some more content coming in terms of the show. Next time I have Jessica Leahy. She is another educator, and we discussed the future of the education system, where it is, how broken it is, and how we're going to fix it single-handedly. She has a plan. Next time. All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.